The African Transformation Movement is calling for heads to roll after royals from the United Arab Emirates landed at the Bhisho Bulembu airport. This after the Home Affairs Minister granted permission for the landing after a request by the Eastern Cape Premier Oscar Mabuyane. For more on this, we're joined now by ATM President Vuyo Zungula. Zungula, good evening. Good to have you once again tonight with us here on In Focus. Following, of course, our previous conversation, you had sent 21 questions to the 5 ministers, if I am not mistaken or so. From the 21 questions, when I look at them, at least there was an attempt to answer. I don't know how comprehensive the answers have been, at least 17 of the questions, but 4 are still remaining pretty much unanswered at this particular point. So let's go a little bit slowly on some of those questions, because I suppose you're going to the public protector because you don't feel the answers were adequate. The key and the main question would revolve around the designation of the Bulembu airport as a point or a port of entry. What do we know about how that process was followed?
Evening, Taba, and to every viewer. The letter from Minister Motsoaledi, with the greatest of respect for Minister Motsoaledi, it cites Section 93B of the Immigration Act as the guiding, section when it comes to the designation of that airport as an international port of entry. However, if you go to that particular section, there's nothing that speaks about that. It should have been 9A. Now, when it's 9A, it directs the minister to actually work in a prescribed manner in order to designate an airport as an international port of entry. Now, if you look at the prescribed manner, it is carefully documented or prescribed in Section 33 of the Border Management Authority Act, which stipulates that the minister should have gazetted the designation 30 days before the declaration, meaning you can't have a declaration without a government gazette that informs people that there is this intention to declare this particular place as an international port of entry, and you are allowing people to comment. Now, in the absence or in the fact that the minister did not follow that Section 30A of the Border Management Authority Act, we are of the view as the ATM that the minister, with all of the wisdom he has when it comes to running that department, but perhaps here he might be misled, and we think it is something that it needs to be looked at in terms of how do you just designate, and because when you want to designate a place as an international port of entry, you need to follow the law. You don't just willy-nilly decide what should happen.
Right. So, I mean, if we look at that letter and the Section 93B that is cited there, and we give the minister the benefit of the doubt that it could have been a typo, maybe by an official, he didn't do due diligence and read it properly and ended up signing it. Surely that cannot be something that we will take into the public protector for. I mean, something that can be easily rectified to say, use the right act.
Yes, indeed. However, the minister, with all of the interviews we've stated, with all of the letters that we've written, that clearly points to Section 33 of the Border Management Authority Act, the minister has not come out to say, I've made a mistake. And even regardless whether maybe he could say it's a typo, but there is no government gazette, there is no public comment. People were not given 30 days to comment before that designation was made. So where is the government gazette as required by Section 33 of the Border Management Authority Act? Yeah. So for us, it is not a matter of maybe saying what is a typo, it's not a typo, but what the law that is very clear, that prescribes that this is a process that needs to be followed. Clearly, that law has not been followed because there is no government gazette. So it is in that spirit asking transparency and accountability.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we move on from that, of course, you wrote the letter, and then they said, look, because of all the noise that was going around in the country, they decided with the GCIS, a couple of ministers there, I think Minister of Police, Minister of Agriculture, Minister Motsoaledi was there as well. If you listen to him coming out of those interviews, he did cite the correct act, Immigration Section 9, that is subsection 1 and subsection 2, I think is what he says he used, particularly for allowing that airport to be declared a point of entry. Now, if you look at that section, as you say, he says there's a prescribed way in which a minister can do so. If we go to the Border Management Authority Act, it says that not overshadowing other legislation, but the minister can do this and follow this particular protocol. Does that mean that there are other legislation that would need to be looked at?
Look, Section 33 of the Border Management Authority Act takes precedence over any other law that, any other law that could be used in this particular instance. You'll recall that that act is a recent act that has been, recently passed by Parliament. Yeah. It is not an act that was passed years and years before. Therefore, in that view, it takes precedence in the sense that it should be the guiding act when it comes to immigration, when it comes to the management or the movement of people. You'll recall that even, there's been borders, there's been the guarding of the borders. It has now been, been guarded, or it has been directed by the Border Management Authority Act. You'll recall that recently. There were even guards that were deployed to Bay Bridge and other points of entry in line with that particular act. So it can't be that when it's convenient, people are going to say, but we use the other laws, whereas recently, all of the talk when it comes to immigration and the movement of people has been affirming this new law that has been enacted, which is the Border Management Authority Act.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're saying this is a new act, and I hear a view that says the Border Management Authority Act was meant to create permanent borders. And therefore, when you are creating a particular point as a permanent point of entry, that's what you follow. But Section 9A, subsection 1 and 2, is for temporary ports of entry, which is being used quite regularly. And this is not actually the first time that it's being used. In fact, it was first used in 2015 when the German army wanted to come in over the Overberg. It was used, for example, when Forte University invited the late President Robert Mugabe. It is being used quite regularly, for example, when Eswatini Railway wants to cross somewhere, when Botswana Railway wants to cross somewhere, when Lesotho missionaries want to follow a missionary route and they cross somewhere. This explanation that we are getting from the minister saying that particular Section 9A, subsection 1 and 2 is being used regularly, and in those instances, you cannot wait a 30-day period and wait for public participation.
Look, that is a convenient spin because clearly in this case, you'll recall that there's a lot of public outcry when it comes to all of the issues surrounding that visit by the President of the UAE. From this, how they landed in the country, how, they refurbish a runway, and how, they've been transporting goods and allowing goods to be in the country. So clearly there's been outcry, and an outcry that would make anyone to panic or anyone to be anxious that they do not want to appear as if they got something wrong. Whereas I want to stress a point to say the Border Management Authority Act is very clear on this. It does not speak about permanent borders or, temporary borders. It is clearly what needs to be followed when it comes to declaring any point of our country as an international port of entry. Now, it is very clear that the minister has not done so and would appreciate if the minister would actually take responsibility if anything has gone wrong from his side, instead of maybe trying, to switch the blame or maybe to make it appear as if there's something wrong with the legislation. There's nothing wrong with this legislation simply because the Border Management Authority Act takes precedence. If it takes precedence, it is an act that should be used in terms of declaring any point as a point of entry, not a case whereby when it's convenient, you are going to quote other sections. However, when it's convenient, you are going to quote it. It takes precedence, meaning it should be the act that should guide the minister when it comes to any declaration of a point of entry in our country.
So that's clearly something that I'm sure will end up having to be ventilated in a court somewhere. In terms of which law would take precedence. But let's move on to the other areas, for example, what you are touching on. This is one of the questions that seemingly has not actually been tackled. I don't know if it has. Maybe I've not heard it. But question 11 from your list of questions is, what procedure was followed in terms of an international body coming to upgrade our local airport here, and what are the conditions, quid pro quo, that would have been put in place, and then the details of the companies that were used to do this upgrade. I've not had any attempt to get that answered, but what I do hear is that, well, that airport belongs to the province, and the Department of Transport would be the one with the details as far as what process was followed for the upgrade. Any clarity on that?
Look, they've not responded to that simply because any response from them is going to expose how they're undermining, the wisdom of South Africans by allowing a foreigner to come and upgrade public infrastructure. And the fact that that upgrading happened so hastily clearly shows that we've got a problem of political will when it comes to that particular, all of the government officials, when it comes to dealing with the issues that affect the poor. You'll recall, Thabo, that in the Eastern Cape, there are children that need to cross rivers when they have to go to school. There was an episode in one of the shows where when a person was going to be buried, that corpse needed to be crossed in a drum or something. Now, how can it be that when a foreigner wants comfort in the sense that they want to land, especially in an airport designated only for them, there's so much, interest. There's so much will from the government in terms of upgrading the runway, applying to the Minister of Home Affairs, getting all of the things in order because they want to appease that particular president. However, when the poor and the marginalized, dejected citizens of our country are crying each and every day for basic infrastructure, children now, they're sometimes dying in pit toilets in the Eastern Cape, but there's no such. So they will never respond to that question because it will expose how they are appeasing visitors at the expense of appeasing local citizens who've got no one to represent them except them as the Eastern Cape government.
Well, President says there are hosting provisions that are in place on a mutual basis when a head of state is visiting South Africa. So this is not something that is particularly made for this guest. It is made for all other guests where there is this mutual agreement as to when our president comes here, this is how you treat the head of state. These are the preparations that happen. And they said as far as that process is concerned, a notification was sent to DIRCO and the necessary ministers were informed, and therefore the necessary preparations were done to allow for this to happen.
Look, for us, you'll recall that this became public knowledge when people in the area started complaining or started asking questions about actually what is happening. It is not a case whereby the Eastern Cape government took the nation into its confidence about what really transpired. And even that press conference that was held a few days ago, it was a result of the pressure that was exerted to say there needs to be transparency. Now, if there was transparency and accountability from the side of the Eastern Cape government and their respective ministers, would not be sitting here asking all of these questions, because we have a forthcoming government that is able to speak thoroughly and give confidence to the people that they are governing in the best interest of the people. However, now they are going to hide behind protocols that they've not even went to as far as communicating to the public to say, we are going to have a visitor as the province of the Eastern Cape. He's coming from this country. The people of the Eastern Cape did not know any of that thing until there was public outcry, until there was people asking questions. Yeah. Therefore, we don't have a forthcoming government in the Eastern Cape. We don't have a government that is clearly about respecting the people of the Eastern Cape.
To stick with that a little bit more. So are you saying that you would be completely opposed to the courtesy under diplomatic engagements that would have been extended to the UAE president in terms of the hosting provisions?
No, not at all. Look, Thabo, that was not an official trip by the president of the UAE.
Yeah.
So they can't spin it to make it as if it was an official trip. Also, if you can read Section 30.3, Section 30 of the Border Management Authority Act, it states there very clearly, notwithstanding any other legislation, meaning, in spite of all other legislations that may be there, but the prominent legislation, the legislation that needs to take precedence, is this one, which is Section 30.3 of the Border Management Authority Act. But on this question of yours, I want to put it clearly. There is no issue when presidents or visitors come to our country. However, we want to stress that it must be done in line with the law, and our laws must not be subverted in order to appease visitors.
So they are arguing that there was no requirement for a public announcement. They're saying it happens all the time. Presidents come into a country, they are sick and they are coming for a medical procedure of some sort, and they are then provided these particular hosting provisions. We seem to have lost Mr. Zungula there on the line. Unfortunately, we'll try and establish that connection with him in a moment. Right, let's look at this now. The families of the 3 trapped Lily mine workers and some former employees also say there's nothing to celebrate on Workers' Day. They say the day opens up old wounds as their loved ones, Priti Kambule, Yvonne Mnisi and Solomon Urende, remain forgotten following the 2016 collapse. Mweli Masilela takes a look.
Yet another walk into Lily Mine by former employees and families of the 3 trapped miners. This time around to hold a prayer session led by Action SA as part of remembering the workers who disappeared 7 years ago when the mine collapsed.
Today marks the end of the 4th year since the families have been sitting at that camp in those tents. So we are bringing a prayer just to mark the 4th year, because the 30th of April means a lot to them. That was the day they decided that they're not going to stay in their houses when their kids are underground. So they came and stay here until their kids are removed from the camp. No, I just pray that something can be done really. On the 10th of May, we are going to court. I think the verdict will favor the families. And we are also praying. Now, you see, we're standing outside. Every time we come here, we make applications, we are granted permission, but every time we come here, nobody knows that we are coming. So we don't know what is happening with these business rescuers who are really worried about that.
We are still saying, like we've been saying for the past 4 years now, that our demands are clear. We need the missing people to be found, because they are missing people. So secondly, as employees, we need our outstanding to be paid. And thirdly, then last, that South Africa, jobs are scarce, there are no job opportunities, but we're told the lifespan of Lily Mine itself is over 20 years of employment, and Babrook over 40 years, and the mine was employing over 1,000 people. So the question to us is that, is this how we fight the unemployment rate that is high in our country? By disallowing people to get jobs. There's so much gold to be mined, but because of some procedures and the laws, here we are today. That's all we need. We don't need ownership of the mine or whatsoever. We need only the 3 things to be catered for. That's why we are here. That's why we are still here, and we are more resolute and determined to make it account even for the 4 years. So our position is that we blame our government who brought the system of the business rescue practitioners, because I don't see it working in this case of Lily Mine.
Life remains tough for some of the former employees as they are struggling to get other jobs.
Mina bengisebenza khona la mayini ngibhala ama-truck ngingumsebenzi amayini lokho kwenteka namuhla sicelebrate lihlanganisa 4 years ikhempu imile lapha solo sicela uNkulunkulu ukuthi akaside imayini ivulwe sesihluphekile sekuningi kumnyama etindlini
impilo namhla sematima kakhulu kunalesikhathi lesi ebengisebenza lekhathi ebengisebenza impilo ebingcono kakhulu cishe into tonke betikhona ngoba siyasitana masiphila sibantu.
The families of the 3 trapped mine workers as well as the former Lily Mine employees say this camp will remain their home until the mine is reopened and Pritinkambule, Yvonne Mnisi and Solomon Nyirenda are retrieved from underground. For Newzroom Africa on Channel 405, I'm Mweli Masilena at Lily Mine in Barberton, Mpumalanga.
All right, Vuyo Zungula, President of the African Transformation Movement, back with us. Let's see if we can be able to wrap up the conversation. Let's hope the network will be able to hold. Because I wanted to touch on the other areas. We can move a little bit on this because I'm sure it will be ventilated quite extensively with the public protector. But the other questions which you are raising are around the goods that were brought into the country, the type of goods, the inventory of the cargo, the consignment to Bedford, the question around the currency, the amounts, and so on and so forth that were declared. SARS pretty much saying there was no money. There's no money that was declared. There's nothing. They didn't bring in any currency. And all the type of goods that were brought in, those that were restricted were sent back, and everything else is per the laws of the country. Do you have any questions around that? Do you doubt what SARS is saying?
It's very, very impossible for a person to go on holiday and not bring any amount of cash. Because it is reported that there were over 600 people that were, processed to enter into the country. Now, you can't possibly tell me that over 600 people, there's none of them that was carrying cash. And the fact that other departments, there were some goods that were returned back, it clearly shows that money would have been there. There's no way, Thabo, you go on holiday and you don't carry any form of cash. Fine, as a president, you don't need cash. But trust me, if you are a cook, you are a chef, you are, some of the people that clean for him, definitely, as that kind of a person, you definitely are going to have cash. Therefore, we do not buy that story that there was no cash there. And it should worry us, Thabo. You'll recall that there was foreign currency that entered through OR Tambo and busy international airport that processes people on a daily basis. And SARS was not able to pick up cash in OR Tambo, and that cash ended up in the farm of the president. So how can it be that now SARS would speak and all of us would have confidence in what SARS is saying, whereas they did not pick up the cash that came through that Sudanese businessman in OR Tambo?
Yeah. For foreign currency, maybe not to the degree that would require to be declared. Do you think that could be possible?
Definitely, Thabo. Look, there's elections next year. Therefore, we must always be anxious as South Africans because we know that whenever elections are coming up, many parties, they want to fundraise. And in their quest for fundraising, they are going to do they're going to come up with means to fundraise for their respective organizations. And having a lab system when it comes to the movement of people and the movement of goods in the airports, that poses a risk where, in terms of there could be money that could come in our country for the purposes of assisting a certain party for the elections. And that money, as it comes from a foreign country, that money, is used to influence the outcome of our own elections. Therefore, we always need to be anxious as to the movement of money, particularly because we know that SARS failed. SARS failed when it comes to that the more than $500,000 in cash. Therefore, we can't blindly believe SARS, particularly when the other elements of this trip, clearly there's not been transparency, there's not been truth, there's not been accountability, because it is very clear that had it not been for the public outcry, those ministers would not have come through and give confidence to the people that they have stuck through the law. Even now, when it comes to Section 30.3 of the Border Management Authority Act, it is very clear on the process. However, the ministers are playing games with the people by quoting other sections, whereas that section is very clear. So us as the ATM are very anxious because we do not want any funny business that would influence the outcome of our elections in our country.
And the question of security then, a risk assessment that has been done. One, the minister saying there's a process called Advanced Passenger Processing System where he says it's a legacy of 2010 where they are able now, even before the plane would leave the tarmac from its place of origin, to be able to know everyone that is on that plane and whether or not they are undesired human beings in South Africa, and they would immediately be returned back. But two, on the question of assault weapons, Minister Cele is saying, well, they were hunting guns. There are certain other guns that were not allowed in the country and they were turned back.
That is laughable, Thabo. Firstly, we've got a problem of illegal immigration in South Africa. Some of them, they are practicing as doctors in our communities. And it's only after they rape, women in South Africa that they are going to be identified as people that even have fake qualifications. To recall, even now, there's a professor that was in Forte that suddenly got his PhD, and he was found to have fraudulently acquired his documentation. Therefore, there's weakness and there's failures in the side of Home Affairs in terms of us finding out whether people are criminals in their own country, because we know there are criminals in respective countries that come and hide in South Africa. Recently, there was a criminal from Japan who was in South Africa for more than 15 years after having murdered someone in Japan. He stayed in South Africa comfortably for more than 15 years, and he was not identified. He was not picked up as a person that was, undesirable in our country. On the case of people being shot and killed, more than 20 of them in Soweto, those guns there were found to have been, and the source was Botswana. And, the Minister of Police openly said so himself. So he can't give us an assurance now that it is not the case in this one, whereas the guns that were used to murder more than 20 people in Soweto, they were coming from Botswana. Therefore, us as the ATM, we don't buy what they are saying, because clearly in the other parts whereby they were tested in this regard, they've proven to be failures. Currently, there's guns operating in our country. Look at the case of Gqeberha, where Somalians were banned taxes of local citizens. Those guns that they were carrying after, it is, heavy weapons that are used only in war. How can a foreigner carry such guns? How can people that are coming from outside of our country be so comfortable with those guns? And how? Because the laws are also very clear that as a private citizen, as a civilian, you're not supposed to be carrying such guns. But Somalians had those guns. When it comes to people illegal in our country and undesirable, still, it is the same thing. So we've got a government, Thabo, that is so worrisome in the sense that they are unable to take responsibility for their failures and give confidence to the people that they can admit when they are wrong and commit to do the right thing. Rather, we've got ministers, they will rather say, come up with a lot of excuses instead of taking responsibility for their shortfalls.
Vuyo Zungula, let me leave it there. Much appreciated. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.